and welcome. I'm Rachel Priestman. I'm from Global Cooperation House in London, and today we're going to talk about New Year. The New Year is like the doorway from the old year into the new year, and it can be an audit time. It can be a time when we're looking backward and when we're looking forwards to the future. It can be a bit of a difficult time too, and sometimes it's not so easy to stick to the things we want to stick to. But I have someone who's going to help us deal with these little challenges of the new year, and I'm very happy to welcome here Charlie Hogg. Charlie from Australia. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you, Rachel. It's lovely to be with you.
So Charlie looks after centres all across Australia where Raja Yoga is taught, and also in Australasia, and he helps with film and production on an international level. But he also travels around the world. I think you've been to at least 60 countries, and so we're very happy to have you here in India right now. So I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts about New Year and the challenges New Year brings, the opportunities but also the challenges, and then to hear from you. So we enter New Year with new hopes, new ideas, new plans, new promises, and then we get to January. And then we get to January the 15th, and then it's not quite the same. So what's going on? Why isn't it so easy to stick to the things that we plan?
You know, I think it probably goes to the heart of our spirituality in a way. And my understanding is that each one of us is a spiritual being, a soul. And a soul is really an overname for aspects of consciousness. You know, my mind, which connects with the world, my intellect, which is always assessing everything at every millisecond. But we have this big database in my subconscious of my past. And you know how sometimes in life you get so inspired, I want to change, I want to become something, I want to do something differently. The pure intention is so great, but we forget that in our subconscious we have many habits from the past. Past, not just behaviors, but thinking and perception in that way. And sometimes I think there's almost three levels of them. There's habits, which are often just based on this life, you know, from family and culture, etc. There's the impressions, the soft ones, I call them, from the past few lives, which are not so strong. You know, impatience, intolerance, things which interrupt my, you know, New Year's resolution. But scored in the depth of the subconscious sometimes are some very deep habits to feel fear, insecurity, lack of self-respect. And sometimes, you know, I'm following my New Year's resolution, but something happens and it just triggers my old story once again, and I fall back into my old pattern. And then a hopelessness sets in. Oh, I can't really do it. But I think what I've learned on the spiritual journey, that to bounce back, it is going to happen. I don't think anyone makes a New Year's resolution that just happens, that our old stuff will come back, and yet we maintain an enthusiasm. And this is really what spirituality does, just to bounce back and keep at it, and you start to see changes beginning.
I would think that one of the qualities we really need if we want to follow through on our resolutions is willpower. What is willpower?
You know, I think willpower is a determination to see things through. But to me, it really, you know, where do I get that inner strength to, you know, it's fine when things are going well, but when things are going, you know, become difficult, to maintain the will to continue. I would say it's a byproduct of love for God. And my own life experience is that when I feel really close to God, I have an inner strength to face things and sustain things that I don't have otherwise. And in Australia, I've done a bit of work with people with addiction. And there's a famous program, I'm sure as you know, the 12-step program, to deal with addiction, which has been going for about 80 years.
Hugely successful, isn't it? Yeah.
Hugely successful. The 12 steps, the 12th step is conscious contact with God. And when people experience that 12th step, they have a determination when the pull to go back into my old addiction, not just of alcohol or whatever, but my old reactions to people, getting angry, feeling hopeless, that addiction as well.
Wow, those are also addictions.
They are addictions. And that they have the internal strength not to fall back into those patterns, because the bottom line is, in a sense, my relationship with God, my contract with God to really be the person I want to be.
Can I ask you personally, perhaps you could share something that you've wanted to change in yourself and what you observed going on and what helped you make a shift?
More recently, I've been making a conscious effort not to think too much or analyze things too much. I feel in the contemporary world we're highly educated to understand the world outside, but not the world inside. And sometimes I think little things happen and we overthink. It's almost an addiction to analyze to an extreme degree. And it's almost like we squeeze all the joy out of life with this over-analysis. And I've really tried to, understand things but not dwell on them, so that you sort of get sucked into this place of unhappiness. But on the other hand, I'd say one of my long-term things I've really looked at is self-respect, because I think at the heart of the spiritual journey is this wonderful journey of rebuilding my self-value, so that no person or no situation controls how I feel about myself. And I observed a short time after I began practicing my spiritual journey that sometimes I allowed people and their comments and situations to change how I felt about myself. And I really practiced thinking differently, breaking the addiction to fall back into a pattern of weak thoughts about myself or whatever. So based on spirituality and wisdom, I tried to practice something different. And I wasn't totally successful at first, but the more I maintained the practice, I could see my self-respect slowly getting better. And I didn't feel so controlled by external things in the sense of how I felt about myself. I could maintain a sense of self-value in almost any situation, and that's been an extraordinary gift.
That's a huge power, because it's that not being influenced by other people or by situations or by people pressing your buttons.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, everything is a gradual journey, but if people ask me, how have I changed over the years, I'd say one of them is I'm far less influenced by all those things you just described, and that's a freedom. It's actually a true freedom in life, that I'm not worried about people's opinions and people's reactions to me. I listen to them because I can learn, but I'm not going to absorb them and let them change how I feel about who I am.
So we're so used to being influenced by what people say, by what people do, by what happens around us. Are there any practical things that you can suggest to help us get to that state of being uninfluenced, or perhaps even being a positive influencer?
I think just having a very sensible attitude to things. One person once said to me, if you have 100 friends and family and colleagues and 99 love you and one hates you, who do you think about? That irrational nature, that I dwell on that one person who is causing me grief. I don't think, isn't it wonderful that actually 99 people do appreciate me and love me? So that's sort of common sense attitude. But for me, I often think that I have a little saying for myself, only my ego accepts sorrow. And when I really feel I am being influenced or affected, I tell myself the wrong eye is sitting up here. I'm under the influence of the ego of superiority, which is my arrogance, or the ego of inferiority, my lack of self-esteem. They're dominating my inner world. And it's a good check for me, because then I say I'm not in a state of self-awareness. I'm not in a state of living as a soul, because when I do, I remain peaceful and I don't allow the mood in my mind to be influenced by external things. So it's a little sort of barometer to help me. And really, I think the spiritual journey is a sort of a journey towards a purity, and a purity where I just don't feel so influenced by all these things in the world. And when there's an emptiness, my mind is like a vacuum cleaner, you know, and we just absorb everything. We do absorb the love and respect, but we absorb the criticism and negativity. We absorb everything, so my mood goes up and down. And I've noticed a huge change over the years. I'm far, far less influenced by the external environment, and it's made me much more relaxed about life and myself.
That must require an awful lot of attention. It's like a constant vigil, no?
Yes, I think it's not attention that creates tension. It's just, I think the beauty of a spiritual life is it's not that you're just sort of observing what's happening around. You have this constant learning inside, you know. You're learning about yourself. You're observing your reactions. And I think if that's what attention is, I love that sort of journey. It makes life much more interesting. Otherwise, boredom sets in and we want another stimulation here, another stimulation. But this constant learning and observation. But I feel you have to be very gentle with yourself, because sometimes you do fall back in your old patterns. And, you know, just like you were saying, you come to the new year, you're really determined, you fall back into the old pattern. But not to feel hopeless about that, but to get back up, because I'm re-educating myself how to be happy and peaceful once again. And that's that's lifelong learning. It's never going to end.
So there's no such thing as failure. I just learned something new. I'm just learning something different.
I think that's a wonderful attitude, because I think when we make a mistake sometimes, I remember my thinking for myself that it doesn't matter if I'm criticized. What matters is if I lose my self-respect. It doesn't matter if I make a mistake, but what matters is if that mistake makes me change how I feel about myself. And it doesn't matter if I fail. I will fail sometimes in life. What matters is when all these things dominate how I feel about myself. And I think spirituality is realizing who I am as a soul, a spiritual being, and in that self-respect, remaining stable as I move around life into all these different environments, different personalities, different responses and reactions. You know, you can stay with who you really are.
I'm interested in how you would advise people watching here who maybe they've had some past pain that they're just not able to let go of. Maybe they're just not able to forgive a hurt that they felt. How do we deal with that? How are we able to move on from something like that?
You know, it's a huge one, isn't it? Because, you know, we have dependent nature, and but you know, I think one of our greatest dependencies or attachments is to my past story. What has happened to me, how I've been treated, what people have said, what people have done. And unfortunately for many people, that story just goes round and around and around non-stop. And it creates such a deep impression inside. I would say one of the greatest acts of spirituality is to forgive and let go. And to me, forgiveness is letting go all the conditions of my mind that stop me being loving. Because nothing makes me healthier than when I'm loving. And when I can't forgive, I suppress my ability to love. And I think, you know, sometimes people say, well, yes, well, that's fine. But if I forgive, am I saying what happened was okay? You know, because sometimes people say, what happened was against my values, was against my principles. But to me, I think it's possible to say, listen, I don't want to live with resentment and hurt anymore. I can even say I didn't agree with what happened. But for my peace of mind, I'm going to move on and I'm going to let go. And to me, I think it's such an essential aspect. And I think often the new year is a wonderful time to observe what I'm carrying, the stories in my head. And often those stories are my own creation. But to me, I've created them as a reality. And sometimes just to say, okay, these stories are making me unhappy. They may be real, they may be my imagination. And how do I get the power? And once again, really, I think what I've learned from the Brahma Kumaris is how to have a link with God, not just a belief, but a real connection, a relationship, a sense of real closeness. And when I experience that, it doesn't really matter. These things don't really matter anymore. I can genuinely move forward. Yes, it's a story of the past. It's not that I will forget it, but I forget the pain associated with the story. And once again, it's like freeing myself. Because Rachel, I've given thousands of meditation courses over the years, and sometimes the people 20, 30, 40, 50 years are carrying such unresolved stories.
Well, it's so painful we don't want to even hit it.
Yeah. But really, what holds on to it? And I think it is my ego that holds on. I still identify with that thing of the past. And I think, once again, when I'm in the right space of self-awareness, not the ego of superiority, the ego of inferiority, I can really come to a place where I can move on, I can let it go when I feel God's love.
And that would really make a wonderful new year. No.
Can there be a better new year than to move on? Actually, a friend of mine told me only recently that a psychologist was telling her that some research, and there's research and research, but says that 70% of our thinking is about the past. And I wouldn't be surprised, because we keep dwelling on situations and people and behaviors. And so it's like my mind is chained to the past and I can't enjoy the present.
Yeah. And sometimes I find myself, it's like I'm thinking of it again, hoping that it will be different.
Yes.
Which is complete madness.
Yeah, you're trying to refilm, just like we're filming an episode now.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And it really is a great act of humility, isn't it, really? Because sometimes things were wrong.
Yeah.
They were absolutely wrong. But to keep proving that they were wrong or holding on to it, it doesn't help me, it doesn't help anyone. And to move forward is really, I think, what spirituality is about.
Yeah, lovely, and the freedom with that. So, Charlie, do you make New Year's resolutions? And if so, have you made one for this year?
I don't often make New Year's resolutions, actually, but I make resolutions as I move through my life, because I think at different times I become aware of something that needs to be transformed within myself. And it's interesting, because I find that the moment you become aware, that's when you have maximum power to apply. You know how sometimes you become very aware of something, but you say, hey, next week I'm really going to pay attention. And when next week comes, the strength of that awareness is lost, and you don't really have the power to implement them. But yes, and even if I can say, just while I've been here at the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris, one thing, you know how little things just touch you, and in one of our morning classes it was talking about becoming fearless. And I really began to think about that a lot. Fear is like a big cloud over life, an enormous cloud that doesn't allow you to enjoy life. And there's gross fears, subtle fears, there's even refined fears that sometimes we're not even conscious of. And I think my New Year's resolution was, sometimes it's such a subtle thing, the fear takes over your mind and dictates a behavior or response. And to really feel, when I'm in my soul conscious, my spiritual awareness of who I really am, I always exist. And really, I can be in a fearless state. And I suppose my resolution recently is to be observed when even the subtle or refined fear enters my mind in a situation, and not to dance to the tune of that fear. Just that awareness is something. So I go on, things come up which I like to pay attention to.
So, Charlie, how will you be spending New Year this year?
I'm not really sure, but In recent years, if I'm in Sydney, we have a beautiful retreat centre outside Sydney in the Blue Mountains, and it's in a World Heritage area. It's quite spectacular, has animals on the property, kangaroos and things like that, and often a large group of us go. And what's quite beautiful is we will meditate, and sometimes to welcome the new year with silence is a very, very powerful thing. And just, we may even think about what I would like to bring into my life, some sort of resolution which we make. But after the new year, we'll maybe have a meal together, etc. But
if I were to ask you to give a message of hope to the world for New Year, what would you say?
I think I would say that the message of hope is to bring hope into myself. And I think that if I have hope, I can spread that feeling everywhere. And we're all observing so many world events which make us very anxious about the future. Anxiety is really a fear of the future, and anxiety levels in our world are escalating extraordinarily. People feel very insecure about the future. And I think once again for me, hope is based on really not just a belief, but an experience of my authentic self as a soul, a spiritual being, which is the fundamental practice of meditation, learning the art of letting go the limited and the temporary and establishing in the permanent, and just enjoying the one relationship that's permanent, the lover of the soul, really exploring the reality of that relationship, not just a belief. I'm not sitting and meditating on a concept. I'm absolutely absorbing myself in the soul that's ever pure and ever loving and ever powerful, a real living relationship. And I find no matter what has happened in my life, when I taste that, there's unlimited hope and I would say optimism and positivity. And I think that if I can spread that feeling around, it's such an important thing to do.
Charlie, thank you very much. I've learned a lot personally from this, but I'm sure all of you at home have as well. Really, what is the new year about? It's about letting go of what's gone beyond. It's about thinking about what we want to make our lives into in the future, but not being held back by despondency or giving up or thinking it's a failure. Just keep going, keep going. And that's only possible really when I have that awareness of myself as a soul, myself as that spiritual being, that eternal being, and as Charlie was saying, that connection with the divine that means that I'm full, that I don't need anything from anybody else, and that I can then, instead of being influenced by what's going on around me or what people are saying or doing, I can actually give a positive influence to the world. And like Charlie was saying, I myself can inspire myself with hope, but then can enable other people to feel that sense of hope and that sense of encouragement which the world very much needs. So Charlie, thank you very, very much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you all have at home. And I know, Charlie, you'll join me in wishing everybody a very, very happy and fruitful and prosperous New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year to everybody.